Chapter 16. By now I must have looked like a zombie myself, I felt like one. Being honest about it, I had to admit that I didn't know how a human being crossed over into the zombie state. I hadn't seen the process. The talkative monster implied that he could control zombies, but he never said a word about how they were made. He simply lied about not reworking me if I surrendered. I wondered, was this how the others became what they were, writing a never-ending war that finally drove them mad? Wasn't a sign of insanity the conviction that everyone and everything is the enemy? That was the way I'd been living since I left the cafeteria and the 2 Rons and began my assault on Phobos Base and wherever the hell I was now. Turning a corner, I was greeted by a sight not calculated to reassure a man doubting his sanity. A gigantic skull, half the length of a full-grown man, glared at me through empty sockets. It seemed to be made of brass. I stared into its eyeless sockets before allowing my gaze to lower. The giant, metal skull had a tongue, a curving, snaky, metal tongue. There was no way this was standard issue in a UAC refinery. Of course, the skull's tongue had to be a lever. I can't help it, I said, I'm a born lever puller. If I were already dead and in hell, it hardly mattered what would happen if I pulled the lever. I still had my curiosity. And if I were still alive, trying to save humanity from an alien invasion, then I had even more curiosity. I pulled the lever. It was ice cold against my already chilled flesh. A metallic, grinding noise riveted my attention. It sounded like all the old, abandoned automobile plants in Detroit had started up at once. And with all that sound, one stupid box rose from the ground containing another pair of skull tongue switches. I pulled the next one in line and heard a click from the wall directly in front of me. Moving to investigate, I saw a crack of light in the wall, then another and another until the yellow lines had formed a perfect square. Secret doors were losing their appeal for me. If this one were going to improve my opinion, then it had better offer something better than the usual collection of monsters. I shoved open the door with one mighty heave. A bloody, naked figure held a gun pointed directly at my face. By reflex, I shoved my own piece right between its eyes. Drop the gun. Drop the freakin' gun. Put it down, I swear to God I'll blow your fool head. Where I can see them, put your hands up. And don't move or ground. On the ground, move. Her eyes were alive, and she spoke words. By now we both stood, each pistol pressed against the other's face, eyes wide with fear, wonder, and hope. Was it? Could it be? Could she be shouting at the top of our voices in pain, rage, and desperate need? My hammer was cocked, but my finger outside the trigger guard. I had just begun to suspect, just begun. Something clicked in my brain. The penny dropped. I recognized the bloody, disheveled, pallid creature. A dream come true, if true, in a world that specialized in nightmares. Panting before my face, watching warily, ready to fire off half the magazine if necessary, stood the reason I had come this far and hadn't yet given up. I wanted to say her name, but I couldn't. We were each locked in a perimeter of silence, holding a gun against each other's face, doubts and paranoia having the only voice. One of us would have to say something. She went first. Drop the friggin' gun. The command came from a lifetime of giving not an inch or trusting without 2 forms of picture ID, and that had been back on Earth. She'd worked hard, her every friendship based on a sense of honor. She'd kicked her way onto the Mars mission. And this is what she'd found. But she'd survived. And I'd survive. She'd kept me alive with every AS and arrow, and maybe her fantasy that I'd come after her kept her alive. Why else use our private code, a link between just the 2 of us? But now there was no room for sentiment, only for certainty. You are a dead man if you do not drop the freaking gun now. Quote, oops. My arm and hand had been through too much to even consider it. My body was wired for instant responses. The same as her body if she were still the old Arlene. The only reason I hadn't blown her away automatically was the time spent praying she was alive, and a willingness to take a risk right now that she wasn't really a zombie. No zombie had ever spoken before. And somehow, covered with mud and gore, she looked too damned bad to be a zombie. Only the living could look that fried. Arlene, your ass is mine, I replied. I've had the drop on you since I opened the damned door. Zombies didn't talk that way, either. They didn't tease or smile a moment later when awareness crept across a human face. She returned that smile, and I knew everything would be alright. Your finger wasn't even on the trigger, big guy. I'd have blown you away before you fumbled around and found it. She was wounded, disheveled, filthy, terrified, naked, and totally alive. You're alive, I shouted. No, really, she shouted back. We slowly lowered our weapons simultaneously, mirror images of each other. Grinning, staring me up and down, she commented, nice fashion statement. I'd forgotten I was buck naked. My damned reflexes insisted on embarrassing me, and I reflexively covered myself. Well, I guess it was one more proof I was still fully human. I doubt that. Zombies are modest. Turn your back, for Christ's sake, I implored. I will not, she answered, eyes roving where they shouldn't. You're the first decent thing I've seen since this creep show began. If we kept this up, maybe things would get so bloody normal that the monsters would simply pack their suitcases and leave. Arlene could dish out a hard time when she wanted. I decided to get dressed. And finally I noticed the corpses and stripped one. She reached out a hand. No, Fly, don't put those on yet. Please. My right foot was halfway into a boot far too small to fit. It stretched, conforming to the size of my foot. One size truly fits all. Arlene turned as red as the crimson wall. Jesus, I'm sorry, Fly. You're my buddy, I shouldn't have made you uncomfortable. Forgive me. I finished dressing. It didn't take long. Now it was my turn to look her over, which I did with a lot more subtlety than she did with me. I kept my eyes moving where she'd let hers stop in embarrassing places. God, she looked good. All the dirt and blood almost gave her the appearance of being dressed in a weirdly hip punk outfit. Her slender waist, tight, firm thighs, medium bust, and long arms made me think of more than the undeniable fact that she had the body of the ideal orbital pilot, her ultimate goal when she'd earned enough in service to take a hiatus, get a degree, and take a commission. Space travel needed the occasional boost in morale. She finally got the idea. There were plenty of corpses around with uniforms, waiting to be stripped. I watched her from the corner of my eye as she followed my example. The best aspect of these form-fitting uniforms was the way they conformed to every contour of the human body. She looked just as good in clothes. I tried to think of something appropriate to say, then grunted, punching her shoulder middling hard. Now I forgive you, I said with a grin. The grin didn't last long. I'd completely forgotten about the bullet wound in my shoulder. The pain finally caught up with me as the adrenaline wore off. Geez, that looks bad, she said. Maybe there's some medikits around here. You mind holding still while I do some alterations on your shoulder? Meanwhile, tell me where the hell you came from. Seemed like a fair deal to me. Long as you tell me what happened to you. A.S. You and the company. And what the hell were you doing hiding in a cupboard? She made me go first. I recapped everything that had happened since I left Ron behind in the mess hall. She'd been through the same crap. I didn't need to be overly detailed about the killing. It would be nothing more than a sentence completion exercise. While I told her my adventures, hoping I wasn't boring her, we weren't standing still, with the soft suction sounds of our boots on the cold, stone floor. We went hunting for medical supplies. I'd rather go up against a dozen zombies than one of these monster aliens, I was telling Arlene as she yanked open a closet door. Dozens of shotguns cascaded down on us like bales of hay, heavy, painful bales of hail. Fortunately, they weren't loaded. Staring at the pile of weapons for a long moment, I put on my best annoyed face and asked Arlene, can't you keep your space neat and tidy? Rolling her eyes, she scooped up one of the weapons and tossed it to me. She took one, too. I regretted leaving behind such a beautiful pile of weaponry. But Arlene and I only had 4 hands between us. We still needed a medikit, and Arlene was starving. With the burning sensation growing in my arm, the medikit was first on the list. Then I was going to get my recon babe out of this hellhole. I'd email her, if that's what it took to pack her back to Mars. No, Earth. Get your crap together, I said, and take mental notes. Notes. We've got to give a full report when we get back. We're blowing this popcorn stand. Arlene smiled wanly. You have any good ideas on that one, Ace? I left a landcart back at the entrance, we can hot rod it back to the air base. And take the troop ship back to Mars. Or even Earth, it should be able to make it. Arlene looked around, studying the architecture. The architect must have been hired by the Addams family. Nothing seemed normal. The surface of the walls was rough, twisted, the sickening color of internal organs. Skulls, monster faces, and decay dominated everywhere I chanced to glance. Arlene coughed politely. Just two problems with that plan. First, we're not on Phobos anymore, Toto. Huh, we're on Deimos, and there ain't no landcarts, or rockets, either. We used all the ships to bug our people out 4 years ago. Fly, we're stuck here, and we don't even know where here is. I must have looked blank. She continued. Look, Fly, don't you remember when Deimos vanished from the screens? No, actually. What the hell are you talking about? Whoops. I guess you were already in custody when we got word from Boyd that Deimos had disappeared from the Martian sky. The idea that a moon could vanish bothered me for some reason. Wouldn't there have been gravitational effects? I asked. She laughed before asking, are you kidding? Do you know how small Deimos is? It's even smaller than Phobos. I knew that. These chunks of space rock were so small that their real gravity was theoretical, notwithstanding the alien gravity zones. Although I'd become used to fantastic events lately, a little nugget of skepticism scratched at my capacity to believe just anything. How do you know we're on Deimos? Quote, "'Cause I've been here, Fly. I did a TDS as a yeoman right here while I was waiting for an opening in the light drop. A yeoman. But the Marines don't have any staff positions, only line positions. On loan to the Navy. Technically, I was still a rifleman, but the only weapon they issued me was a word processor. I had to think about this. The implications were definitely bad. And the image of Arlene Sanders as a secretary was astonishing. I looked up. There was a skylight in the ceiling, and where Mars should have been, there was nothing. Where stars should have been, there were no stars. The black of space was missing, too. All I saw was a gray mist, not to be confused with clouds. The texture was all wrong. Having a gift for the obvious, I said, we're not in orbit around Mars, are we? She smiled and patted me on the head. Congrats, Fly. You win the Nobel Prize. You don't see a pressure dome up there, do you? But we're still sucking air. I know we're on Deimos. I recognize all the stuff that H.P. Lovecraft didn't redecorate. Who, I wanted to know, was H.P. Lovecraft. If he'd had anything to do with this, I wanted to punch his lights out. No, Fly, Arlene said. He was a fantasy writer, early 20th century. American. Obsessed with hybrid monsters and underground labyrinths. Always describing ancient menaces as eldritch. I'd never heard the word before, but it sounded just right. This situation has got eldritch coming out the ass. Quote, you can say that again, she agreed. And this is Deimos, muchacho, only thing is, these bastards have taken it somewhere. Great. So what's number 2? Quote, she looked puzzled for a moment, then she frowned. I don't want to hurt you, Fly. I licked my lips, feeling my stomach contract. I never liked anything from a girl that began like that. What? You've always been more loyal to the Corps than I was, my friend. I stiffened. What's wrong with the Corps? The Marines have given me a lot. Babe, in case you've forgotten. She smiled and shook her head. Arlene hadn't forgotten my father, a pathological liar and petty thief who ended up doing 25 to life for his 4th felony conviction, trying to run down a state trooper with his pickup truck. He died in Vacaville 2 years later, from a cerebral hemorrhage, they said. My father was the pettiest, lowest, meanest man I ever knew. He couldn't even understand the word honor. He never knew why I first joined the Corps, never would have understood if I told him I did it for him, so I would never be him. All right, I confess. Father, forgive me, for I have sinned. The Corps was the world to me. There's nothing wrong with the United States Marine Corps, Fly. But damn you, there's something a bit more important. Like what? Like the human frickin' race. Quote, she had me cold. So I got pissed. Hang the human race. It's Tommy this. And Tommy that. Oh, don't quote Kipling at me, I'm the one who gave you the book. Fly. Fly, what do you think the whole purpose of the core is? I didn't say anything. I didn't like where this was leading. I knew what she was going to say, but I couldn't figure where she was wrong. You're so much into honor and duty, Fly. Don't you know what duty means? We're the ones on the wall, kiddo. They might not know we're there, might not even know there is a wall, might not give a hang. But that's what we're here for. Fly, this thing is bigger than just getting us both out alive. We're the only ones here, only ones who know about the invasion, the only ones who might be able to throw something big and heavy into the gears. And damn it to hell. I'm not going to bug out until I do it. I glared at Arlene. I wanted to protect her, get her out of there. I was a man. She was my bull. First was a Marine. And so was Arlene. I understood what she meant about the wall. Somebody had to man it. Who else? I lowered my gaze. We couldn't just bug out, even if we could find a transport on abandoned Dimos. We had to get to the bottom of all this, and if Dimos was like Phobos, I had a bad feeling that meant getting to the bottom of the Dimos facility. For some weird reason, the alien monster demons preferred down. Besides, her point number one still made sense, too. We don't even know where here is. Dimos had been yanked away somewhere. We were stuck. No rocket, no clue where we might be, only that we weren't in orbit around Mars anymore. Up meant what? EMP tie space. Nothingness. The only way out, if there was one, was down, following the levels of Dimos to the bottom. I glared up at her again. Her eyes were as cold as steel, as warm as the sacred heart. Well, don't expect me to say I'm sorry, I muttered.